Okay, and finally we're going to transform our summer scene into winter. I'm going to start with the ground, so we can hide the grass, we won't need it in the scene. We can hide the furniture for now, and the trees, the reeds, and the forest. Right. So let's unfreeze the ground, turn off the vertex channel display, since we won't use any sand in this scene. Everything will be covered with snow. And let's change the material to basic flat gray vray material for now. Okay, so reset that to flat gray. Right. And for starters, I want to add some more detail to the snow. You could use a displacement map, but in this case I'm going to model the deformations in 3D. So I'm going to collapse it to editable poly and select some of the polys I want to modify. And I would probably want, okay, I probably want to mess around with something like this, parts that are in front of the house. Okay, so I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna detach it. The rest we can freeze, but this object here, we're gonna add HSDS modifier to add some more detail, so we have something to work with. Right, and let's select some faces. Make sure you leave the edges intact so they don't form any gaps after subdividing, and let's subdivide. Okay, 1 time and 2 times. And I think that should be enough. Let's add, actually let's just collapse to editable poly. It's going to be a bit quicker that way. And I'm going to distort it using the graphite modeling tools. And in this case, the paint deform push and pull brush. Okay, so play around with the size and the strength. And you can start messing around with the snow. So for example, we want some snow blown into the corners. Okay. You can press Alt to deform inwards and Shift to smooth out the geometry. Okay, so something like that, maybe some snow here. Okay, let's bring the brush larger and a bit weaker. And just draw some snow wherever you feel like it. Okay, let's look at it from the camera view. Not bad. And maybe some snow here on the edge of the pond. And just draw in some detail. Okay, let's make the brush a bit smaller and add some negative detail. Let's say there were some old tracks here or something like that. It has snowed in. Okay, since the angle of the view is a bit low, you won't see those details too well, so it doesn't matter what exactly is going on there, but just as long as you have something interesting for the eye. Okay, so I think overall the shape is quite good. Let's add some snow to the top of the roof. And I'm going to use Snowflow plugin for that. You can also model it manually if you wish or don't have the plugin. It doesn't really matter. This is just way quicker. So just add your object to the Snowflow Pro, set the desired thickness, and I'm also going to increase the noise, and just press the Let It Snow button. Okay, the noise is a bit too much. And maybe let's relax it a bit. Okay, that's fine. Assign the material. And I'm gonna modify my material a bit. I'm gonna set up a fall-off map there. And set two colors. One slightly bluish and one almost pure white. And this is how it looks. Now let's test it out. I think the color is fine. And let's add some slight bump to make the surface a bit more interesting. And I'm just going to use a regular fractal noise map. Maybe set it something like 150 for the size, 4 levels. And let's try it at 20 for now. Let's see how it looks. And yeah, the snow surface becomes more interesting. And I think it's good enough. So, okay, that's the basic ground cover and snow on the roof. Now let's fix that water. You want to turn it into ice. So the first step is getting rid of the bump. Make it smooth like ice. Perfect. And maybe even too smooth. So I'm gonna set up a regular noise here in the bump slot, maybe a large size like 200, and very weak, maybe at 1. And just to distort those reflections a bit. Okay, that's a bit better. And maybe too large, maybe let's try 150. Okay, good. And now I think it's too smooth. So to make it less smooth, I'm going to use a reflection glossiness map. And again, I'm going to use a fractal noise map here. Okay, but I'm not going to leave it at 100%. I'm going to set it at something like 10 or 15, maybe 15. See how that looks. I think it looks much better already. Okay, and now I think this edge along the snow is a bit too smooth. So how about we blend this ice with the snow. And as a blend mask, I'm going to use vray dirt. Okay, and just swap those occluded and occluded color around and turn on invert normal to see the effect. This way it generates masks, generates a white mask coming out from the edge where the ground touches the ice. Okay, it's a bit too weak. Let's try a higher radius value, like maybe 50, to see if it's working. And it's working fine, as you can see here. And I think the transition is way too smooth. And it's probably a good idea to use a radius map to break it up. And again, fractal noise comes to rescue. Just make it a bit more contrasty. And it breaks that edge up very nicely. Excellent. So that's our basic ground color and the ice. Our next step is working with the trees. And I'm going to show you multiple methods to make some winter trees. So let's start with a texture-based approach. I'm going to unhide my forest. And go down here to my trees, which are used in the forest. Okay, let's isolate that selection. And let's look at those trees. So the most obvious thing is we have to lose the leaves. That's easy to do. Just select the mesh and delete everything with the ID number 2. Okay, that's clean. Same for the others. Select element, go down to select by ID, enter 2, and delete. Very easy. All right, great. So now now we want to create a texture that looks like a tree trunk covered with snow. And this is a great example where the fall off map comes in handy. So let's pick the material from our tree. Actually, let's just create a new material. New vray material. Let's name it Snowy Tree. And let's start with the diffuse. So I'm going to create a mask. For the mask I'm going to use fall off. Let's look at this preview here. I want to change the fall off type to towards away and set the fall off direction to world z-axis. And this way it affects how the object looks depending on if it's facing up or down on the z-axis. So I want the white parts to be up, and I want the downwards facing parts to be black. And we can edit the fall off curve. We're adding a couple of points here. And doing something like this to make the fall off much sharper. And now, as you can see, everything that is facing up looks white. I'm gonna go closer and render that, show you how it looks on the tree. And it's already starting to look like it would be covered with snow. So that's the basic idea. You can play around with the exact position of the snow and the distance for the fall off. Okay, this is too much, everything is white. So you generally want to keep it above the midpoint. Okay, like this. I think it looks good. Alright, so you have your basic mask. Now let's make it more interesting. We want to add some noise so it doesn't look so even and so it looks more realistic. And the easiest way to do that is by using a gradient ramp. I'm just gonna cut my mask from the diffuse slot, set up a gradient ramp there, and change the gradient type to mapped. And now just paste your fall off right here in the source map. And as you can see, it works just the way it did before. But now you have these options for noise. For example, let's set it to fractal, amount to 1, and maybe a smaller size, maybe a smaller amount. And you can play around with these gradient values to bring that noise upwards. Okay, so maybe like that. Maybe bring it down a bit. It looks like I want to make it a bit larger. Okay, that's fine. And maybe let's bring that snow a bit lower. Okay, good. And let's use the same mask in the bump slot. Let's set the strength to something low, like maybe 2 or 3. Okay, so for now looks good. Now we want to add the diffuse texture. To do that, we want to change the gradient ramp to mix, keep the old map as submap, and we're going to use it in the mix mode slot as the mask. So basically I'm going to use my snowfall for the white part, and I'm going to use that bark texture for the black part. Okay, and here you can see the result. Looks pretty nice, I think. Maybe we can play around with this gradient a bit to bring the snow slightly downwards. Okay, so some of it is on the trunk as well. Right, and now let's set up a bump map. Let's start with the bark. I'm going to use that bark texture in the bump slot. And maybe set it at something like 40. Okay, good. And we also want to increase the blurring for it, so it doesn't have the speckled appearance, but looks more like this. Okay, great. And we want to make the bump a bit more complicated by bumping the snow a bit differently than the rest of the object. So we're going to change that bitmap to composite map. Alright. So the first layer will be the tree bark, and the second layer will be our gradient ramp mask. So just copy it, go to your composite, create a new layer, and paste an instance right here. Okay, and we want to use a mask for this layer, which is basically the same texture. So just paste it once again over here on the other side. Okay. Let's play around with the value a bit, bring that snow downwards. And I think something like this will work fine. Okay, and let's just assign that material to the rest of the trees. And let's render and see how they look. And I think they look quite nice. So this is the first approach you can use. It's very useful for trees without leaves or without needles. And it looks quite good. Okay, so just check if the correct material is applied to the forest. I think it looks good enough. Okay, so this is a good material for tree trunks and trees without leaves or needles. So next approach is going to be a bit different, and I'm going to show it on the pines. We're going to add some snow to these pine trees using the Snowflow Pro plugin. For a long time I struggled with it because it seemed impossible to add nice looking snow to all these fine needles, so it actually looks like the snow rests on top of them. But then I realized that I have to create a simpler geometry for the plugin to work with. And in this case, the GrowFX objects are perfect for it. So what I want to do is I want to replace those needles with something much simpler. And in this case, I can hide those needles. And they all start from these little stems here. I'm going to copy those stems, I'm going to paste them and hide the originals. Okay, so these are going to be our, let's call them volumes. So first of all, I want to make sure I have the absolute minimum I can get away with. So I'll go to distributors and set the distributor count in point to 1. I think that's going to be fine. And now what we want to do is replace them with some simple large meshes. And I think something like a large flat sphere with a low poly count is perfect for it. So let's flatten it a bit like this. Actually, let's rotate it upwards and flatten it a bit. Okay, like this. And I think something like this might work. Now you can select your GrowFX object and change its mesh from cylinder mesh to instance geometry. Press OK and pick that sphere. And you can see these large, weird looking volumes generated. It might actually look quite cool in some cartoon or something. So now I want to adjust the size of my sphere to something more appropriate. So just scale it down. Until you have a nice solid coverage of the branches. It looks like this might be about right. Maybe just make it a bit wider without increasing the height. Okay, I think this is going to be perfect. So now make sure you set different material ID for these volumes. You can do that by setting the material ID for the sphere. I'm going to simply use a material modifier, and let's say we're going to set the material ID 5 just to make it easy to remember, and make a copy of this object. Okay, so for the copy we're going to disable those volumes, turn back on our leaves and leaf stems, and freeze it. And now for the copy, we're going to collapse it to editable mesh. and delete everything except the elements with the ID number 5. So just select ID 5, press Ctrl I to invert selection, and delete it. Okay. And let's try to move it upwards a bit to make sure it covers the needles. So like that. And I'm gonna break it into pieces just so the Snowflow plugin is easier to work with. Just grab some elements. Okay, like this. And detach. And maybe let's detach these as well. All right. And now we are ready to add some snow to it by using the Snowflow plugin. So create a Snowflow Pro object. Pick one of the branches. Let's start with this one here. And let's test it out to see how it looks. Okay, let's maybe make it a bit thicker. Set it to 40 and let's set the gap height to maybe something larger. Reduce the noise to 0. And let's not blend any of the edges. Okay. And a pretty nice result, I think. Maybe just make it a bit thicker. All right. I think it looks good. Let's create another Snowflow Pro object and do the same thing for the other branches. And it actually remembers your settings. So just pick the object, click the button and wait for it to generate. Very simple to do. And finally one more. For the top. Excellent. Now we can get rid of those helper objects. Select all those Snowflow pieces and attach them together. So collapse to mesh, attach together. And I think I want to rework the mesh a little bit by using some optimization to make it a bit more low poly. So let's try setting that at 20% or so. collapsed editable poly, weld some vertices, add some shell, and finally turbo smooth it. And that's basically a quick way to create some snow on conifers with needles. If you have the GrowFX version available for the trees. Okay, I'm just gonna throw on my snow material and render and see how it looks. And I'm pretty happy with it. So there you have it. That's how you can cover all those pines with snow. I'm not going to show you the other models, but the basic procedure is pretty much the same. And for the trunk, you can use a modified version of this material, just replace the bark texture with the pine bark. Okay, so that's it for the trees. I'm gonna quickly go over them, cover them with snow, and show you how the scene looks after that. Okay, so I did the same thing for the rest of the pines, so they are covered with snow now. I also assigned the snow material to all these short bushes, and I removed their leaves. And the only thing that's left now is these large trees right here, on which I'm going to demonstrate another technique you can use with GrowFX vertex colors to add some frost to the tips of the branches. Okay, so turn off the box display. And that's our tree. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the leaves. And we're going to leave the rest of the objects like they are right now. Okay, so let's look at it and see how it looks in the render. Okay, so that's the basic tree. I'm gonna assign my advanced snowy tree material. Okay, so here it is. Let's assign that. Actually, I'm gonna make a copy, snowy tree, and then just assign. Let's render. Okay, and the trunk looks fine, but if you look at the branches, they look a bit spotty and not too nice in general. So what I want to do is I want to make all those small branches covered with nice frost, nice and white. So basically what I want to do is change the material to vray blend. Okay, let's keep that old one as submaterial, and I want to add a coat of snow. Okay, but now we need a mask. We need a mask which is only white on the tips of the branches. And it's easily achievable using the vertex colors of the GrowFX object. Okay, so let's start with trunk. Enable vertex colors. Okay, and just turn off those meta meshes for now. Okay, and first for the trunk we're going to use this gradient. Okay, just add another point and drag it upwards, so only the tip stays white. So like this, because usually the trunk would not be covered with frost, only the small pieces. Okay, so that's nice. Next level branches 01. Okay, enable gradient. And let's do the same thing. Okay, and maybe drag it up a bit less, since the branches are thinner. Make sure that second color is black. Okay, same for the trunk. And now let's go to the second level of branches. Again, I'm gonna try coloring along the path. And I think this is gonna work fine as it is. Maybe let's try inheriting the color from parent as well. Okay, I think that looks a bit better. And the transition is more even, it looks a bit more natural. And finally, for those leaf stems, I'm just gonna go ahead and inherit the color from the parent or the branches 02 and color the elements. Okay. And this mask should do exactly what we're looking for. Now we just have to assign it as the blend amount. So set that as vertex color. And once you render, you can see that all the branches are nice and frosty. And the trunk has some nice snow on it. And I think it's a nice advanced material you can use together with the GrowFX vertex colors. All right. Okay, so let's display that as a box, unhide all. And maybe let's make the ground a bit more natural looking around these bushes here. I'm just gonna select those GrowFX objects and isolate my selection. Okay, let's see how they look. And let's bring that snow up a bit. So using the freeform tools from the graphite modeling, the push and pull, a larger brush, and maybe bring the snow up. Smooth it down a bit. and something like that. I think it's gonna be fine. All right. Let's check how that looks. Not so bad. And now let's unhide all and see it all together. Okay, so the snow looks nice. Trees look okay. And basically that's our winter scene.